Good morning. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining the Solver session, Beyond Excel, Agile Budgeting for the Era of Volatility. My name is Tracy Rich, and I am Vice President of Alliances here at Solver, and I'm joined by my fantastic colleague, Stephanie Johnstone, who is Vice President of Solutions Engineering. So Solver is first of all, a proud sponsor of AcuCONNECT, and we are an Acumatica certified solution for planning, reporting, consolidation, and analysis. So we have been in business since 1996. We are a global company. We have offices in 15 countries. So for those of you that are multinational, we certainly have the reach to support you. So what we do is what's called XFP&A. So that acronym stands for Extended Financial Planning and Analysis. So you can think of anything around your budget process, forecasting, financial reporting, consolidation, etc. And we work across a number of verticals, including construction, distribution, manufacturing, professional services, SaaS, nonprofits, hospitality, and healthcare. And our team has years of experience around corporate performance management, as some of you might know it, or extended financial planning and analysis. We're recognized on G2 as a leader, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And for those of you who need solutions that are SOC 2 and HIPAA certified or compliant, Solver certainly meets those criteria. And then we have been a longtime partner with Acumatica partners around the world. So Solver is, as I mentioned on the prior slide, a leader in G2. So G2 is a review site that it reviews solutions by customers for customers. And we are in G2 as a cloud-based extended financial planning and analysis solution. And you can see on the right-hand side some of the awards that we've won. And on the left-hand side are all the things that Solver automates and streamlines, including your budgeting process, forecasting, reporting, analysis, and consolidation. We get the question often, what is XFP&A? And as I mentioned previously, there's a number of other acronyms that customers and partners used to use: corporate performance management, enterprise performance management, but really it stands for extended financial planning and analysis. Think of things that go just beyond the general ledger, financial, operational, etc. And in the middle, you can see our word bubble with many of the terms that people use that describe processes that need to be automated that's included in extended financial planning and analysis. Our agenda for today is talking about what is the era of volatility and what it means for budgeting. We're going to talk about what are some of the warning signs that your process is broken, what are some of the best practices, and finally, we'll wrap up with next steps. So Stephanie, let's talk about, we're in the era of volatility. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so I'm sure this is not news to anyone, but not just currently, but over the last number of years, things have really become a lot more volatile. And I would say, you know, going back to COVID, even before COVID, things change extremely rapidly, and they're a lot more unpredictable when it comes to changes in the market, when it comes to changes with how we do business. So what's really, really important when it comes to budgeting is that you're very agile with this process so that you can adjust to those changes. So that means doing things the old way with how we used to budget, with how we would create an annual budget and sort of let that collect dust on the shelf. We need to be able to update that as these changes happen as close to real time as possible. So that's sort of the new reality. And that's where we want to make sure our annual budget is in alignment with that process, as well as our forecast.
And then let's talk about, Stephanie, what does that mean for budgeting and those processes?
So there's a few things that are important to focus on when it comes to skills for really mastering sort of this new era of budgeting. The first one is predicting the future. So, no big deal, everyone. We just need to learn to predict the future. Now, of course, we know that that's not really possible for most of us, but what we can do is we can get more accurate with having closer to real-time information that's a lot more timely, that gives us better insight into trends, so that as those changes are happening, we can adjust. So although maybe we can't see what's going to happen, we can see those trends, and then we can make adjustments for those. And so when we take those predictions, then we can apply them to our business, and then we can adjust, we can react, we can take advantage of opportunities faster than our competitors. The other piece of that is having visibility into our data over a long period of time, having that better insight. It allows us to make better investments so we can think long-term instead of just looking at the here and now within our business.
Makes sense. Now, this is something we are very familiar with. We hear about this all the time when we're talking to customers, but let's talk a little bit, Stephanie, about what are those warning signs that a customer has a broken budgeting process?
Yes, so these are like when you're driving your car and you have those little alerts. These are your alerts for your budgeting process. And I talk to hundreds of customers every year and go over some of their challenges. And these are common, regardless of the industry or the size of the customer that I'm working with. I would say one of the most prominent warning signs is heavy use of Excel. And we know why we use Excel. It's because it's so flexible. Oftentimes we have other tools and they just don't give us the flexibility that we need to get the level of detail and the level of accuracy with our budget. But the problem with Excel is that as these models start to grow and sometimes they turn into these massive workbooks, we can end up with broken links, and they can be very, very hard to identify that they're in there just because these files contain so many different formulas. So that you can end up with an accurate budget and not even know it. Another challenge is you don't really have good security within Excel. You can't give everyone sort of a different version of the workbook for their department. You can cut and paste pieces out of it, but that becomes a very manual process. So manual processes are also sort of a painful thing when it comes to Excel. Also, your data in that file is only as good as when you've manually updated it. So if you have your Acumatica information, your GL data, journal entries are being posted, that's not being reflected in your updated budget. So it's only going to be up to the last point in time. You pulled that data, you dumped it in there. So we're not getting those updates. So that's really impacting our ability to look forward. And there's also lots of challenges with versions. Not just versions of your Excel file. So you can have problems having multiple versions floating around. Also different versions of your budget and forecast. So it's difficult to lock things down and make sure you finalize that plan when it's in an Excel workbook. Beyond the Excel piece, because that's a very big one, it also comes down to having limited guidance. So this is outside Excel. Just in general, many customers that I work with, they don't have great visibility into those strategic goals and plans. And that's really important when you're budgeting, so you know what your targets are. And when you don't have that information, it's also very challenging, to see where you're going. But the way that we can address that is through a centralized database. So you can have all your targets, all your budget and forecast, easily see them in one place. And when you lack that, that's another warning sign. Missing deadlines, missing dates, not getting your budget done on time, or even having folks making adjustments after that budget should be locked down. That's another big one. Lack of interdepartmental communication. None of our budgets or our work activities happen in a silo. So we need to have visibility into some of the other key departments that we have dependencies on and where they have dependencies on us. And many times I hear this a lot from people that I'm working with, is that they don't have the ability to add the level of detail, support, or context to their budget because it's too restrictive. So you want to be able to add as much information as you need to really make sure everyone understands what's going into that budget.
So Excel alone is not excellent. So why don't we talk about what some of those budgeting best practices are, Stephanie? Because I'd love to hear about it.
All right, so we talked about some of the challenges and some of the things that we don't want to do, but let's talk about what we can do to fix our budget process and make it more streamlined and more accurate. So the first thing I would advise is to make sure when you're starting that budget process to always start with a preparation checklist. And each of these bullet points here, we're going to go into more detail. I'm going to break them down, but this is sort of at a high level. So start with a preparation checklist. Before you budget, we're going to want to do a year-to-date analysis and reforecast. So we're sort of taking stock of where we're at. We want to make sure that those strategic goals from the executive level are trickling down to everyone that needs to sort of know what that vision is. And we want to budget at the right level of detail. We want to make sure that there's enough granularity there so that everyone understands what's in the budget. And lastly, we'll talk about what are the 4 key outputs. So if we do all these things right, we're going to have 4 key outputs of a successful annual budget. All right, so on to that first step, which is beginning our preparation checklist. So the first thing I'm going to tell you, if your budget process starts in August, September, you're going to want to start early with the planning piece, right? So start 6-8 weeks before that and start getting everything in place. The first thing I would say is create a high-level project plan. This doesn't have to be a super detailed, in-depth project plan, but we do want to make sure that we have some of those key budget milestones, who's involved, who are the stakeholders, and those important dates and everything documented so we can make sure that everything makes sense and it's going to flow in a logical way. The next thing we want to do is make sure everyone that's involved knows the plan. So we want to finalize how things are going to be communicated, make sure everyone has insight into goals, timelines, and targets, and knows where to get that information. Now that we've sort of communicated what we're going to be doing, we want to make sure ahead of time that all of our users have the right level of access they need. So we want to do a little bit of testing, make sure they can log in, make sure they can access what they're going to be doing in the budget process. Because oftentimes, people's roles might change or you have new hires. So we want to not be in the 11th hour sort of trying to make these changes. We want to get it set up ahead of time. So that's the security and making sure they have access to the data for their portion of the budget. Then we want to give them insight into where they stand right now by giving them access to their departmental financials or other key reports. And then from there, once we're done with that, we're going to start distributing the budget model, distributing the templates, distributing the assignments and the workflows so that everyone can get started on that process. So that's our preparation sort of in a nutshell. Now let's break down even further what those next steps would be. So before you start the actual annual budget, and this has a good quote on here saying, to know where you're going, you must start by knowing where you're at, right? So that's the importance of doing this analysis and forecasting. We need to know where we stand right now, and we want to know what our outlook looks like for the remainder of the year so that we have really good information on what we can sort of see how those trends are going into the budget year. We want to make sure that the numbers make sense and that they're reasonable and they're in alignment with current predictions. So depending on your department, that might look a little bit differently. Many managers, you might look at financial statements. Depending if you're maybe marketing, you might be looking at marketing specific reports. Sales might be looking at different things around sales and products and customers, HR, perhaps around headcount. So depending on your area of responsibility, that may look a little bit different, but you're going to want insight into your current performance. Then from there, we always recommend you start with that updated forecast. So we'll take our year-to-date performance. And in this example, let's say, we're just on a calendar year, January through December. That might look like a 7+5 forecast in August, right? So we're taking actuals for the first 7 months, and then we're forecasting the next 5. And when we're talking about forecasting, that should be a very streamlined process, very driver-based. So we're not having to go in and do another version of the annual budget. We just want to carry out a lot of those trends and be able to make adjustments. The nice thing about this is once we create this updated forecast, we can also use that as a baseline for our budget. And it's a great check to make sure that things are reasonable and we're not missing any key items. Another thing to consider before you start the budget, and this is something that a lot of folks don't tend to do just because once you're done with the budget, you're ready to move on to other things. You're ready to put that behind you. But it's so important to start to evaluate once you get actuals in and once you're about to start next year's budget is to look back and see in last year's budget, where did we miss target by the most? What areas of our budget could we improve? Were we off base with our compensation and benefit budget? How was our sales budget, marketing budget? Maybe some of those areas would require a little bit of a different approach. So if we can change the way that we're budgeting in the areas where we're not necessarily hitting the mark, then we can have a more accurate budget. So it's always important not just to look forward, but also to look back and see where you can improve. All right, the next piece, and this often happens more at the executive level, is once we're getting ready to budget, we want to see those strategic goals, right? So this is going to come from our executives or board. They're going to give us that long-term outlook. So we're going to know what our targets are. So it's important that they're looking at things like market and industry trends. But when they're setting those high-level goals, maybe it's a 5-year outlook, we want to take those high-level goals and then break those down from the organization level to the department level to the individual level, so that when we're budgeting, we know for our area exactly what the expectations are. Then when we have these expectations, we can put those in alignment with our budget, with our projections, and then we can measure our performance against it. So that's how we have that alignment from the top all the way down, is making sure that we have those cascading goals throughout the organization that we all have visibility into. All right, so we've done our prep work and we're ready to actually start budgeting. There's a couple of key ways that we can budget. Now, I know a lot of people that I speak with that are currently budgeting, they do a lot of top-down budgeting and maybe not as much detailed budgeting, bottom-up budgeting. So the difference is when we're doing top-down budgeting, this often starts with our senior management outcome and it works down to details. This is a great way to start your budget. So sometimes maybe we take those forecast projections, we might update them for the upcoming year, and we can say at a high level, this is what we expect our P&L to look like. This is what we expect our sales to look like. But then the next piece of that is we want to take those top-down numbers and we want to make sure that we then get to the more detailed level from our budget contributors who have more insight to those individual areas of the business. So that's our bottom-up budget. So maybe now our sales manager comes in, sees these high-level projections, and then refines that based on his or her knowledge of the area, looking at detailed customer information, detailed product information. This allows us to refine those numbers and get really detailed and let the experts be the experts in their area of the business. And that just lets us be a lot more accurate. So that can be challenging when you don't have a solution that has, strong controls and workflows and security and gives everyone access to their own data. But when you have a solution like Solver, this is where you can start to bring in all of those contributors and really start to have a more accurate budget. So I say start top down, but make sure you're always doing that detailed bottom up budget as well. All right. So what does that get you? So once you've gone and completed your budget process, and you might go through some revisions, put that through a workflow, make sure everything is approved, finalized, and fully locked down, what you're going to have is you're going to have a united management team with monthly accountability reviews. That's because everyone knew what their targets are, because we got those strategic targets in there. They were able to align their budget with that, and now they know what the expectations are. So now when they're working in their area, they know what the plans are, and then they can align performance against it. And that's how we can put great KPIs in place for different departments and across the organization, because now we have very clear-cut targets. So what this means when it comes to reporting and analysis, we have clear P&Ls, balance sheets, cash flows for different areas of the organization against targets. We have KPIs for other areas of performance. We have a detailed workforce plan that we can ensure if we're varying against that, we know what our new hires are, we know what any potential projected attrition might be, and we know for every department what the details are of the budget, not just high level, those very granular details that can be super important.
Well, Stephanie, that was really insightful, because I think what we're hearing is that a lot of those manual processes can be transformed with an automated solution to really allow organizations to transform their planning process into a strategic tool that accelerates better decisions. And when we talk about what Solver does and how Solver can help automate those processes, oftentimes Acumatica is not the single source, right? When we talk about annual planning processes, there's a number of data sources that might be part of that process, right? It might be payroll data. Maybe customers are involved in acquisition and they have a organization that they've acquired that are coming off another ERP, and they need to weave that in for their planning and reporting process. So can you talk a little bit about the architecture here and how that works from an extended financial planning and analysis process?
Yeah, so definitely spot on with what you said there, Tracy. To me, when I'm working with customers, this is often one of the most important things that we can do for them at Solver, and that's bring together all of their key management data sources into one single source of the truth. If you think about the budgeting process and the forecasting process, that's not just your general ledger financial information from Acumatica or even your subledger information. Oftentimes, you might have other key data sources where you need to get information. That might be your detailed payroll or some of your marketing metrics. Sometimes that information exists in an Excel file, or it even exists in a homegrown database. All of those data sources and more on the left-hand side, that's what Solver does, is we can connect to those, bring them together, and then when you're budgeting, we can budget off of any and all of those data sources. When we're reporting and looking at our KPIs and performance, we have access to all of that data from one single tool. So that just gives us that complete visibility and allows us to do it from one single solution instead of jumping from tool to tool and trying to bring all of that data together. It gives us great visibility, and that's how we can have better prediction and better insight.
And so this Steph, yeah, and on here, I mean, for Acumatica customers, we also have our Solver Quick Start. Can you maybe mention that just briefly?
Yeah, so Solver has something called Quick Start, which enables us to connect to Acumatica. So that would be on the data source side, our ERP piece, and plug you right into Solver so that you can get up and running really quickly. There's numerous out-of-the-box templates that you can start using. So there's financial reports, there's some really slick dashboard and analysis interactive reports, and it's a great way to get started, get a feel for Solver, and then from there you can continue to build on those capabilities to expand into the more custom areas that are unique to your business. But it's such a fast way to get started, to get up and running, to actually get a lot of value out of Solver immediately.
Wonderful. And so we would like to say a very sincere thank you to AcuCONNECT, to Acumatica partners and customers. And as a next step, we ask you to download our white paper, because then you'll be entered into a chance to win our $100 Amazon gift card. So that's always great. And that white paper will really cover a lot of those best practices that we covered today. And just Stephanie and I will be here to chat with anyone that has questions. We're happy to answer any. We'll be here for the rest of the Acumatica AcuConnect conference today. And we thank you for attending our session, Beyond Excel, Agile Budgeting for the Era of Volatility. So take the Solver Acumatica tour if you're looking where to download the white paper. It will be actually in our booth, and you just scroll down and you'll be able to download it right there. So thank you very much for attending. We appreciate it, and we hope to be talking to you a little bit later today.
Yes, thank you, everyone.